Good morning. Good morning. Nice to meet you. I'm going to speak in English. My Hungarian is pretty terrible. I apologize for that. I grew up with some Hungarian friends, but my success at learning the language was never that good, although we did get drunk a lot of times together, so I learned a lot about their fun. So thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here today. By the way, can you hear me at the back? Does this work? Okay, great. So this is my first visit to your lovely country. I'm very excited about that. As you heard in the introduction, oh, by the way, I tend to speak fast when I get really excited. So if I speak too fast, just tell me to slow down, because I'm like a child sometimes. I spend my life with criminals. I grew up in a northern Canadian town. I currently live in Denver, Colorado. I was a police officer for almost 10 years. And I was a criminologist for a number of years, teaching at universities, and I've been doing work in the field for 25 years. Along the way you learn about people who do crime is you talk to people who do crime. That includes young offenders. It includes people who have been involved with serious crime. It involves people who are in gangs. And I spend my time talking to these people and learning about their lives and learning what they're doing. And there's one interesting thing I've discovered about that is when you talk to them and you learn from them is when I try to listen to their story and I try to see the differences is they look a lot like you and me. Of course, they have gone over a line that you and I haven't gone over. Well, I hope we have gone over it. But then again, when you came here to this conference and you drove, I'll bet there are some people in this room who might have gone even a little bit over the speed limit. Even a little bit. I drove in from the airport yesterday, and I saw a lot of people pulling in front of our taxi who weren't exactly following the rules. So rule breaking is a very, very funny thing. And what you learn when you study crime for a living is you learn that people who do crime aren't always engaged in what criminologists call criminal behavior. They're engaged in what we call human behavior. That is, they do things that everybody else does, except they do it a little more. They get a little more greedy, they're a little more angry, they're a little more drunk. And at those times, they break the rules, and they end up causing damage and victimizing other people. That's what we call crime. So I want to talk today to you about three things to bring the idea of how urban design plays a powerful role in preventing crime. Because there are many ways to prevent crime, and urban design, as you just heard, is only one of them. So the three things I want to talk to you today about is I want to talk to you today about an aspirin for handling headaches. I want to talk today about a tree, and I want to talk today to you about an apartment building. Those are the three things, only three things, that's it. And then tomorrow we're going to do a follow-up workshop where we'll get into the details and more specifics about actual designs and actual lighting levels and technical things. But those are the three things I want to start with. Before I do that, I want to make a couple of comments to you, and I want to see what you think. Comment number one is, after 35 years in criminology and studies on crime and crime research, one of the truisms, one of the true factors of crime and prevention of crime is the truth that crime is never distributed equally across the urban landscape. What I mean by that is no matter where you are, no city has an equal risk of crime. Oh, of course you can be robbed anywhere, that's obvious. You can have your pickpockets. I was in Paris the last week before I came here, and I was always careful because in the left bank, pickpocketing is a big problem. So I had my hands in my pockets, which is a stupid thing to do, because pickpockets know that, and they watch to see where your hands are. So even I'm not that smart. But the truth is that it's not equally distributed. It's concentrated, like weather. If you watch the weather at news, the weather fronts come in. The rain comes in here. It's hot over there. There's storms over there. It's concentrated in places, hot spots. Why do you think that is? Let me ask you to do something for me. I want you to turn to the person beside you, in either side, and I want you to ask them this question. Why do you think that crime is concentrated in some places, in Budapest, for example, and not in others? Take about 30 seconds. Turn to the person beside you and see if you can come up with an explanation as to why that is. Do that now, please. Your assignment was very quick, and you need to be very, very quick at the draw when we're talking about my lectures because we move quickly. Did you have an explanation? Why does crime happen there versus there? If some of you talked about the reasons for that, and you started to talk about places, locations, things like poor lighting, things like alleys, back laneways, behind places, perhaps near bars and taverns after it closes, when all the drunks pour out into the streets. Perhaps there is high risks. There are certain areas where crime is concentrated and certain areas where it's not. And some of the reasons for those locations, and the reasons why I loved the previous statements about safe streets, is because if we're going to make safe streets, we got to know how to do that. It doesn't make any sense to talk about safety without knowing where crime happens and why it happens there and not here. So that's why urban design, architecture, landscape architecture, engineers, traffic engineers, builders, developers, police officers, city politicians at all levels, have an enormous role to play. But you do not have a role to play by yourself. You have a role to play with each other. So the question, once you learn the tactics of crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED, in the business, and my friend Paul van Zoomeren is here from Holland, who is one of the chairs of the International Septet Association. For many years, Paul and I have known each other, and in our group, we always talk about SEPTED, the acronym that's used to describe the phrase is SEPTED. I don't know why. It makes no sense, but that's what it is. And one thing we've learned once you've learned the tactics of SEPTED, the strategies, is that's not enough. You need to learn how to work together, how to collaborate, how to develop partnerships, formal programs, memorandums of understanding, collaborative policy. These are the mechanisms by which successful SEPTED is implemented. So your role is critically important. So I'm going to give you some references, and being the former recovering academic, I'm going to ask you to write some things down. And so what I'll do is I'll start with some websites for you to get you started. The first website I want you to write down is this one. Many of the ideas and the concepts I'm talking about, we've put onto this website. And this is a network we've developed called Safegrowth. And on there's toolkits. You talked about, I heard discussions about SEPTED guidebooks and guidelines. We've developed a number of these around the world. The International Septet Association, of which I was one of the co-founders back in 1996, has developed a number that are currently also online. I'll give you their website in a minute. And we encourage you to become part of that. I'd love to see a Hungarian chapter of the International Septet Association. There is a European chapter, the chair of, sitting right over here, my friend Paul van Zoomeren, who can help you do that. The second one is a website which I do, a blog. I'll probably blog about you next week. We like to hear stories about, storytelling is very important to get the message across. Tell stories. So the stories are told on the blog. That's the website for that. That's the address, the URL for the blog. And please, by all means, join us, comment. The interesting thing about it is we hear from people all over the world. People in New York, people in Athens, people in Melbourne are talking right now. We visited in Japan not long ago. And it's fascinating because although we think we're so different, we think our cultures are so different, and we don't even speak the same language, whenever we walk the streets, whenever we talk to people, whenever we hear the experiences of victims, it turns out to be very similar from city to city to city. So if the problems are very similar, it stands to reason that some of the answers will be similar as well. That's why collaborating together and sharing our stories is so critically important. So there's a book we wrote. There's going to be copies outside for you. This is on Amazon now. You can get the copy. Some of the stories are in the book. This is a team of people who've been doing this for a number of years. We decided to write it down. We've been so busy preventing crime, we haven't had time to write about it. And of course, you have to write it to get the word out. So we actually finally got to sit down and write it, and that was our book last year. I can tell you there's 3 things I don't want you to forget. And this is going to sound strange coming from somebody who does crime prevention and urban planning. And I don't want to overstate the case, but I want to be clear about something. And the reason I say this is because too often what happens is we get caught up in a new idea, and the new idea becomes so exciting that becomes everything. In North America, we call it the flavor of the month. There's a new flavor now. And because we hear the word and it's very exciting, we all want to get on to that new flavor and say that I'm the expert and I'm the one who does it now. That's fine to get new ideas moving, to get new programs started, but you can oversell. You know the concept of overselling something? You promise too much, and that can happen as well. So I want to give you some warnings about my feelings of these warnings, and my friends will comment on their perspective when they give their talks. The warning number 1 is designing out crime, a concept about looking to stop crime by doing design. I want to be careful about this. I want to be careful to say that you can hack at the branches of crime, but never dig at the roots. And sometimes when you just do design, you put technical security measures in place, like security cameras, CCTV, or better lighting, or gates. Any of those technical responses, designs that try to stop crime. Sometimes they don't work. Sometimes they make crime worse. You can turn lights on in a place and actually increase the crime. So I don't want to oversell this. You can't just design out crime. It's more than design. It's about putting the social together with the physical. Academics call it nurture versus nature. Is crime caused by nurture, families, alcohol, mental illness, or is crime caused by nature? Opportunities for crime, poor lighting. The answer is both. And we can argue about how much one and how much the other, but both have to be part of the equation. So when you do design, you have to keep in mind that you may be doing design a year from now, incorporating SEPTED into your urban designs, into your architecture, into your planning, and you may be saying, I need to make sure I have good natural surveillance, I have good access controls, I have good territorial controls. I'll talk to you about territoriality in a second. And that's fine, but you can't ever lose sight of the fact that crime is ultimately a social phenomenon. It is about people. It is about families, upbringing, social cohesion, alienation, alcohol problems, drug abuse. Those also are a major part of it. If you just do the lights and the cameras, you don't really dig at the roots. There are things that can if you have a high crime area or one of these hotspots, there are things you can do to disrupt that pattern. Things you can do in SEPTED, physical SEPTED, what we call first-generation SEPTED, urban design, lighting, and cameras. I've been talking about these things. Or things you can do in what we call second-generation SEPTED, or the social programs that reinforce the first generation. Those can help to disrupt the crime patterns. But we don't ever just stop with that. We then go further to restabilize the problem, the neighborhood where it was. And we use all kinds of very cool and sophisticated planning techniques. Some of them aren't so sophisticated. In North America, one of the terms that we use nowadays is something called tactical urbanism. Is that a phrase that's in Hungary? I haven't heard it yet, but tactical urbanism, we'll talk about this in a second, but tactical urbanism is a way to get people to take ownership of their area and their places that helps to stabilize that neighborhood in the long term. So stabilizers and disruptors are kind of the two ways we go about doing that. And the third, and this is very important, is context is everything. The reason why SEPTED guidelines fail when they fail is because they don't take into account context. Lighting here may work to reduce crime, but lighting over there may actually make it worse. Context is very important. So we spend a lot of time in SEPTED, and in the International SEPTED Association, we have certification programs where we insist that anybody becoming certified is familiar with methods of analysis, methods of studying, of research, of looking to seeing how to do interviews, of looking at crime maps. So those things are very important. What tends to happen instead, at least in North America, and please don't do this in Hungary, is we tend to go to the crime maps and crime statistics, and we say, oh, look, the crime map says there's problems over there and not problems over there. The problem with a crime map is it doesn't tell you the whole picture. A crime map is like a weather map. Think about weather maps. How come whenever the weather person tells me there's going to be rain next 3 o'clock tomorrow, and I'm standing at the corner of the street and there's no rain? What happened there? Well, the weather map only gives you the patterns. It doesn't tell you why. It tells you where, but not why. In order to understand the why of weather, you need to know things like chemistry and biology and meteorology and things like that. It's the same with crime maps. You can't look at a crime map and predict a pattern. One of the things we do a lot in North America nowadays is predictive analysis. Predict where crime is going to happen. It drives me absolutely crazy. Because they're almost always wrong. Even when they're not wrong, I could have guessed. We're not that sophisticated with this stuff yet. We're in the very early years. Jane Jacobs wrote her books, and you heard about Jane Jacobs earlier on in 1961. It sounds like a long time ago, but we've only just begun to understand how these patterns take place. So context is everything, and you must learn how to do your proper analysis in order to do SEPTED properly. Analysis is important. Context is everything. So those are the three main lessons. Okay. You've heard about defensible space. Oscar Newman was one of the first persons to talk about this. He wrote about public housing in New York City in the late 60s and early 70s. His book, Defensible Space, was what a lot of us use as the foundation for first-generation SEPTED. And he would talk about something like that. That was I'm not sure, where was that, Paul, do you know? It was pretty bad. It was in New York somewhere, one of the early housing projects, and he talked about how you make that space more livable and how you make it safer, and one of his solutions was to do something like that. Break space down, get territorial controls over certain areas, get people to do it. Well, that's really great and all, but actually any good designer in this room, any good landscape designer would do that now anyway. I mean, we kind of know this now. It's kind of like who would do that anyway, first of all, and secondly, why wouldn't you do that? So it was early days in this sort of stuff, but what he focused on and what a lot of the anthropologists in the 60s started to talk about was he started to talk about space, how important space is. As a matter of fact, the role of space, the power that space has over us as people matters a lot, because the reason why crime is not distributed equally is because we make different space choices. Designers in the room will know this. We make different, what are called proxemic choices. You made one when you came into this room. Look around the room. It's happening right now. Can you see what I'm talking about? Can you see the fact, for example, if you look up here, that most people don't sit at the front. Most people sit at the back because they think the teacher's not coming back to pick on them. It's what? Yes, right. That's space. That's called proxemics, that's space. So here's an example, and this is a powerful concept in SEPTED. This is the mechanism by which first-generation SEPTED works. It says that there's a distance between me and you. In fact, why don't I get, let me see, Paul, my friend, why don't you come up here? To approach each other, to speak to each other, we come up like this, and we say, hello, how are you doing, Paul? Nice to see you.
Fine.
Okay, now, you notice, if you look to where we're standing, how we're holding each other's hands. If you look down to our feet, those at the back of the room, stand up. Stand up. stand up. Look down here. Toes, Paul's right foot, his right toe, and my right toe, that distance there, I'm sure I don't know the meters, the millimeters, but it's about 12 to 18 inches. I guarantee it. It's always that distance. Thank you. It's always that distance. The reason is because we want space around us, space cushions, space distances. This is the concept of proxemics. It's very powerful. The reason why offenders choose that place and not that place is because they understand how space works. They don't pick places where they're going to be observed. They don't pick places where they're going to be apprehended. They pick places because they have an acute sense of territorial control. If they know that to commit the crime, we must know that to prevent the crime. It's an old idea. So take a look at this. I just did this last year. We were doing some work in New York City on the public housing. Take a look at this. So here's a project, and this is one of our class members. The woman on the right, her name is Claudie. She's a social worker in New York, and she was working with us. And we went out to do what, in our training, we have these, we trained, all our training is, by the way, is collaborative. I don't do any police training anymore. All my police training is with community members. So police, community work together at the same time. We train together. Wonderful experience. And when we do this, we get out to the street. And we do exercises. One of the exercises we do is called the pop-up exercise. And it's exercise to find a place to get local people to come around and to try to design it in a fun way. So Claudia and her team here have chosen the entranceway to Pennsylvania Station subway, which, if you know Manhattan in New York, it is the busiest, one of the busiest intersections in the whole city. I mean, there are thousands of people running here and running there, shopping and buying and doing all this stuff. And Claudia and her team picked the subway station, which is like the busiest spot. People are getting down the subway, they're getting up the subway, they're unaware, they're oblivious to where they're going, to what's around them, they're just trying to get somewhere. Time is money. Get there, get there, get there. So she chose this location, and she picked some people who were just walking by. And this little girl there, her and her mom were walking by, and Claudia explained, let's make this a fun place for people. And she had a box of little pieces of chalk and those little little rubber mats. They're that thin. They're about $1. They're very, very cheap, or €1, super cheap. And she just had this box. She said to this little girl, "Why don't we make something fun here?" So the little girl says, and she's like 6, 7, 8 years old. She says, "Okay, I'm going to make a fun entranceway here with these lines that says fun, 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 and I'll put this little mat so that people will see it." And I'm looking at this thinking, there's no way. No one is going to pay any attention to this. They're going to walk right over that thing, step all over it. But the interesting thing about space and about proxemics is that people pay attention to their environment, even when they're in a hurry in one of the busiest cities in the world. And if you want an example of that, I took a video. And I want to show you the video. And during the video, people are going to be entering and exiting the subway station. And they're going to come up, and they're going to walk up to that blue, looks like green in this, mat there that the little girls put out. What I want you to do is that I want you to count with me how many people step over the mat and how many people step on the mat. All right? And we'll count out loud. See, we can count together to see how many we can see. Ready? Ready? Here we go. 11. Watch this now. Watch this. And boom. Okay. So she didn't do it, but the funny thing was that I stopped it too early there. The funny thing was what was the 11th person? She turned around, she stepped on it, she turned around and she apologized to the little girl. That's how, and this is like just the top of our heads. 60 years after Jane Jacobs wrote her books, it still has a powerful impact on us. Space matters a lot to people. Now here's a crime prevention example of the same concept. This is in London. Some of our CEPTED design crime people in that country decided to try to prevent the crime of shoulder surfing. I don't know what that term is here in Hungary, but it's when criminals look over your shoulder when you put your code into the bank machine. And they're trying to prevent that by keeping people away. And the funny thing is that those mats are not mats, they're blue paint. All the prevention person does was paint out this little space that looked like a mat, and then whoever came up to get their money stood behind the mat. That's how simple it was. So we can do this very effectively if we pay attention and analyze it correctly. Here's laneways, how you take a laneway where this older lady wants to walk down the laneway, and it's not a very safe area. There's not good surveillance. There's nobody there. It's dirty. There's garbage all over the place. An image matters a great deal when it comes to preventing crime. Here's a strategy they use in Vancouver, Canada, where the city planning department actually encourages proper design of laneways, alleyways. Here's an intersection in Portland, where they're trying to stop cars from, speeding through the stop signs. So the community together gets together to activate the space. They make it beautiful. Here's a bus stop in New Orleans that our team went down to try to stop shootings around a bus stop. And the neighborhood together worked as a partnership to create their own bus stop themselves. They built that. They watch it. It doesn't get vandalized. Here's the tree. The tree means in order to do this effectively, you need to do it so that you don't do it 2 or 4 people, but as much as possible, you do it with people and by people. That's the roots, not the hacking at the branches. So let me give you a quick case study at the end here. This is a project we did in Toronto, in Canada, a number of years ago to try to turn an apartment structure back from the brink of crime. This is called the San Romanoway Apartments. It was a very high crime area in the north part of the city. Crime rates were much higher than the national average. They had all kinds of issues with drugs, and they had violence, and they had assaults. There was about 4,000 residents in 3 modernist towers, about 30 stories high. So it was a poor community. There was some immigration in the community, but it was really an old set of buildings. And it was in a high crime part of the city. There's the crime map, so you don't rely on them. And the facility was run down and dilapidated. And at some points, the police had to go in with SWAT. I don't know what you call it in Hungary, but SWAT operations to deal with gangs on the property. So we had to get the residents to work together. We had to analyze the property properly, and we had to really think it through. So we organized a committee, an organization, association. The association got together and started to develop programs. And the programs were all kinds of things, from septet and lighting and cleanups right through to social programs, like programs to help the kids with school homework, programs like job training, right in the apartment buildings. We helped improve the parks, the green areas. Here, the local cinema has opened up a cinema inside the building. It's the opening of the cinema. And one of the mistakes that I made was trying to transform the basketball courts into better basketball courts, and the young women told me, we don't want basketball courts, because it was African Canadians. A lot of black folks were living there, and the black girls were coming to me saying, we don't want basketball, we want tennis courts, because of Venus and Serena Williams, who were their heroes. I didn't listen. I started to pay attention. And sure enough, after about 5 years, the crime rates dramatically transformed in the San Romanoway buildings. And best of all, about 3 years ago, the person who came to open up the summer tennis camp was Serena Williams. Isn't that cool? So that's me. I will take questions, I guess, later in the day. And thank you very much for your time.